morning, class 5. I would like you to turn to lesson number 3, a pair of slippers. Let's read the story of a little girl whose parents work at a construction site. Mohini jumped a little as she walked towards the site of the multi-story building where her parents were construction workers. The hot tar burnt into the soles of her feet. A pair of slippers, she whispered to herself as she clutched the bottle of water with one hand and held her baby brother, Keshav, with the other. Let there be enough money to get me a pair of slippers. She had been growing so fast that it was all her parents could do to get her a skirt and blouse that was big enough to last through the year. There were the other children too to think of, and they went to school. They needed uniforms. I wish Keshav hadn't been born, she thought viciously. Because of him, I had to stop school, and that was easier work than this. She reached the construction site and handed the water to her parents. Then she put Keshav down and returned to her job of sifting sand through the slanting sieve near the roadside. Out of the corner of her eye, she watched the passers-by hurrying to work. Feet flashed by, in shoes, in sandals, and in slippers. Any one of those would do, she thought. Then she gave a start as she heard the screech of brakes and a loud wail. It took her a moment to realize that Keshav was not beside her. With a loud scream, she ran to where he stood, crying in the middle of the road as vehicles moved around him and drivers shook their fists and cursed. She swung him onto her hip and retreated, hoping that her mother had not seen. It was her father who had caught sight of the whole incident from his perch on the wooden slats 15 feet off the ground. He yelled something at her, but his voice was drowned in the noise of the traffic, and she hoped he would forget by the time he got down. The building progressed fast, and soon summer was almost over. Mohini still hadn't got a pair of slippers. There was always something a little more important to buy for the family when the weekly wages came in. Until the day Keshav decided to chase the stray dog that was playing in the sand beside the side. At first, it was only a game, and Mohini ignored her brother's squeals. Then he grabbed the dog's tail and pulled. The pain made the dog turn and snare, and Mohini raced desperately to get Keshav away. She didn't see the shred of glass until she had stamped right into it with her bare feet. She screamed with pain. Her voice made Keshav let go of the dog's tail, and it slung away. Mohini looked at her foot, which was bleeding profusely. She felt giddy. Keshav came up and held her arm, too scared by the blood and what had just happened to him. Soon a piece of cloth from Ma's sari was tied around the wound and it stopped bleeding. She'll need stitches, said one of the women workers, but her papa hushed her. It will heal in a few days, he said. But it didn't. And finally that weekend, Papa counted out a few notes and said to Mohini, "Come, let's get you a pair of slippers." The monsoon set in the next day, and Mohini was thrilled that she didn't have to get her bandage wet. With the softness of the slippers to cushion her feet, she could barely feel the pain of the wound. It's like magic, she thought happily. My new slippers have made the wound heal. The rainy weather didn't relent for days, and work on the site came to a standstill. Mohini huddled in the plastic-covered shelter in the building. Keshav was cranky and annoying, but she was not affected because her mind was still in awe of her wonderful new possession. It was early morning when a deep rumbling awakened Mohini. Thunder, she thought, wrinkling her nose at the idea of more rain. Suddenly, the rumble gave way to a cracking sound, and she looked out of the shelter, mystified. To her horror, the pillars of the building were cracking and the masonry was coming down slowly. Run! She screamed, shaking her sisters still half asleep and pushing them out with her parents. Then she turned back to lift Keshav. That was when darkness came crashing down on her. When she regained consciousness, she realized that a beam lay at an angle above her. There was rubble all around, but the beam had protected her from the full impact of the collapsed bricks. She sat up slowly, scared and that her movement would make the masonry move and bury her completely. Keshav, where are you? She called. There was no reply, and tears came to her eyes. Was that troublesome brother of hers dead? She looked around desperately and spied Keshav's yellow shirt among the fallen bricks. She tugged and realized that she was holding a small, thin arm. Frantically, she dug in the dirt until she could see her brother completely. He groaned and she began to cry with relief. He was alive. Above the ankle of the beam, Mohini could see a ray of light. She began to crawl towards it, dragging Keshav behind her. It seemed like hours before she managed to poke her head out of the hole and see relieved faces looking down at her. When at last she was out of the rubble, safe in the arms of her mother, she looked down at her feet and noticed that she only had one slipper on. I must find it, she cried, moving back towards the building. But as she did, the last of the masonry came down and she knew her slipper was gone. Keshav waddled up to her and put his hand in hers, squeezed it. Suddenly, the slippers no longer mattered.